September 23, 2025. The South China Sea, a region already simmering with tension, was about to become the stage for a confrontation that would send shockwaves across the globe. At dawn, the horizon was painted in shades of gold and blue, the water deceptively calm. But beneath that tranquil surface, two superpowers were on a collision course, and the world was about to witness a clash that would redefine the balance of power in Asia. On this fateful morning, the U.S. oil tanker Liberty Sentinel cut through the waves, a steel leviathan carrying 550,000 barrels of crude oil, cargo valued at a staggering $42 billion. Its destination, the U.S. forward base at Puerto Princesa, Palawan, a critical outpost in America's Pacific Defense Network. On board, 27 American crew members went about their routines, unaware that their ship was about to become the epicenter of an international crisis. Shadowing the tanker was the USS Barry, a guided missile destroyer bristling with the latest in American naval technology. With 370 sailors and Marines on board, the Barry was more than an escort. It was a floating fortress, a symbol of U.S. resolve in contested waters. The Barry's Aegis combat system, a marvel of modern engineering, stood ready to defend against any threat, its sensors sweeping the sea and sky for signs of danger. But this was no ordinary patrol. The South China Sea had become a chessboard, with every move scrutinized by Beijing and Washington. For years, China had claimed vast swaths of these waters as its own, building artificial islands and fortifying them with missile batteries, radar domes, and airstrips. The U.S. in turn had vowed to keep these sea lanes open, conducting freedom of navigation operations and supporting its allies in the region. As the Liberty Sentinel and USS Barry pressed westward, they crossed an invisible line, Beijing's self-declared 9-dash line, a boundary unrecognized by international law but fiercely defended by the Chinese military. In Beijing, commanders watched the American convoy with growing unease. To them, the presence of a U.S. tanker and warship so close to their fortified outposts was a provocation, a challenge to their authority in what they considered their own backyard. At 8:40 a.m., the tension broke. US sensors aboard the Barry picked up the faint electronic signature of a Chinese Type 052D destroyer lurking just beyond the horizon. Its radar locked onto the American ships, its missile tubes primed. There was no warning, no last-minute radio call, just the cold calculus of power politics playing out in real time. Suddenly, the Chinese destroyer unleashed a barrage of 12 YJ-12 supersonic anti-ship missiles, each one a technological terror capable of flying at nearly Mach 3. The missiles arced into the sky, their warheads programmed for one purpose: to obliterate the Liberty Sentinel and send a message to Washington that China would not be intimidated. On the Barry, alarms blazed. The Aegis system sprang to life, tracking the incoming missiles and launching a salvo of interceptors. Sailors rushed to their battle stations, adrenaline surging as they prepared to defend not just their ship, but the very credibility of the United States Navy. The air was electric with tension, every second stretching into eternity. 10 of the Chinese missiles were intercepted, exploding in brilliant flashes high above the waves. But 2 missiles broke through the defensive screen, streaking toward the Liberty Sentinel with deadly precision. In a heartbeat, the tanker's steel hull was torn open, fire erupting across the decks as hundreds of thousands of gallons of crude oil ignited. The sea turned black with burning oil, smoke rising in a column visible for miles. 3 American sailors died instantly. 12 more were gravely wounded, some thrown into the water by the force of the blast. The Liberty Sentinel, once a symbol of American economic might, was now a floating inferno, a stark reminder of the risks faced by those who serve on the front lines of global power struggles. In Beijing, the initial reaction was one of triumph. State media hailed the attack as a victory, proof that China could strike at American assets with impunity. But beneath the surface, Chinese commanders knew they had crossed a line. The United States would not let such an attack go unanswered. Within minutes, the mood in Washington shifted from shock to resolve. The president convened the National Security Council, and a simple directive was issued to the Pacific Command: retaliate and make it count. The world held its breath as the U.S. prepared to respond, not with words, but with overwhelming force. The American response was swift and calculated. From Guam to EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft scrambled into the sky, their mission to blind Chinese sensors and sow chaos across enemy command channels. Simultaneously, to B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, each a flying symbol of American technological supremacy, were vectored toward Woody Island, China's most heavily fortified outpost in the South China Sea. On the deck of the USS Barry, sailors armed the ship's vertical launch system, programming 10 Tomahawk cruise missiles for a precision strike. The target, Woody Island's airfield, radar installations, and naval port, the very heart of China's military presence in the region. As the American counterstrike took shape, the contrast between the two superpowers became clear. China had struck first, hoping to humiliate the United States and assert its dominance. But the U.S. response would be measured not just in firepower, but in the message it sent to allies and adversaries alike. American strength is not a bluff, and aggression carries a price. By 10 a.m., the South China Sea was no longer just a contested waterway. It had become a battlefield, the world's attention fixed on the unfolding drama. The stakes could not have been higher, not just for the sailors and airmen in harm's way, but for the future of the entire region. The world watched in real time as the American counterstrike began to unfold. News networks from Tokyo to London broke into regular programming, their anchors' voices tense as they relayed the latest updates from the South China Sea. Social media exploded with speculation, satellite images, and raw footage of the burning Liberty Sentinel. For millions, the question was no longer if the United States would respond, but how far it would go. At 10:07 a.m., the first wave of American retaliation swept into action. The EA-18G Growlers, flying at the edge of Chinese radar coverage, activated their next-generation jamming pods. In an instant, the electromagnetic spectrum over Woody Island became a storm of static and ghost signals. Chinese air defense operators, trained for years to expect American stealth, now found their screens filled with confusion. Commanders shouted into radios that had gone dead, their orders lost in a sea of electronic noise. High above, the B-2 Spirit bombers glided silently through the stratosphere, invisible to all but the most advanced sensors. Each bomber carried a deadly payload, GBU-57 bunker buster bombs, the heaviest non-nuclear weapons in the U.S. arsenal. Their mission was clear: cripple Woody Island's hardened defenses and render its airfield unusable. On the deck of the USS Barry, the tension was palpable. Sailors and Marines, still reeling from the attack on the Liberty Sentinel, now found themselves at the tip of America's spear. The order was given: launch Tomahawks. One by one, the vertical launch cells erupted, sending 10 cruise missiles skimming low across the waves. Each missile was programmed with precise coordinates, their warheads designed to obliterate runways, fuel depots, and command centers. The first impacts came at 10:42 a.m. The Growler's jamming had done its job. Chinese HQ-29 air defense batteries, usually formidable, were caught off guard. The B-2 South released their bunker busters, which plunged through reinforced concrete and steel, detonating deep within the island's infrastructure. Shockwaves tore through radar domes and command bunkers, collapsing structures that had been touted as invulnerable. Almost simultaneously, the Tomahawk missiles struck. 4 slammed into the 2,700-meter runway, carving craters so deep that no aircraft could hope to take off or land. 2 more targeted the naval port, their explosions igniting fuel depots and sending fireballs into the sky. The remaining missiles found their marks among ammunition bunkers and hangars, triggering secondary detonations that rocked the island for minutes. From the air, Woody Island was transformed in less than half an hour. What had been a fortress bristling with Chinese military power was now a landscape of smoke, fire, and twisted metal. Satellite images captured the devastation, the airfield in ruins, dozens of aircraft burning on the tarmac, and the port engulfed in chaos. For the first time in decades, China's claim of invincibility in the South China Sea had been shattered, live, for the world to see. The human cost was staggering. Initial reports estimated over 150 Chinese personnel killed, with more than 325 wounded or missing. Many were trapped beneath collapsed hangars and bunkers, their fates uncertain as rescue teams struggled through the wreckage. For the families of those lost, the price of Beijing's gamble was heartbreakingly clear. Yet even as the flames raged on Woody Island, the U.S. Navy was not unscathed. The Liberty Sentinel continued to burn, its cargo of crude oil lost to the sea and sky. The 3 American sailors who perished, and the 12 more who suffered grievous injuries, became the human face of this confrontation. On the USS Barry, the crew worked tirelessly to save their wounded comrades and contain the damage, their exhaustion etched into every movement. In Washington, the response was swift and unequivocal. The president addressed the nation, his words resolute. The United States did not seek this conflict, but we will not shrink from it. Our commitment to freedom of navigation and the security of our allies is unbreakable. Those who attack us will pay a price, swiftly, decisively, and overwhelmingly. The contrast between the two capitals could not have been starker. In Beijing, official statements were muted, the usual bravado replaced by a stunned silence. State media struggled to explain the scale of the losses, their broadcasts filled with images of heroic resistance but little mention of the devastation. Behind closed doors, Chinese military leaders faced a grim reality. Their most fortified outpost had been reduced to ruins in less than 30 minutes. For America's allies in the region, the events of September 23 were a revelation. In Tokyo, Manila, Hanoi, and Taipei, leaders watched the unfolding battle with a mix of relief and apprehension. The U.S. had demonstrated not only its willingness to fight, but its ability to strike with precision and overwhelming force. The message was unmistakable. The balance of power in the South China Sea had not shifted eastward. If anything, it had been reaffirmed. But the story was not just one of military might. It was also a story of sacrifice, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. On the decks of the USS Barry, sailors paused to honor their fallen comrades, their grief mingling with pride in their mission. In the burned-out remains of Woody Island, Chinese survivors worked side by side to rescue the wounded, their courage undiminished by defeat. As the sun climbed higher over the South China Sea, the world began to take stock of what had happened. The numbers told a chilling story. Over $3.8 billion in Chinese military hardware destroyed, including 22 frontline fighters, 2 corvettes, and irreplaceable radar installations. More than 150 Chinese personnel dead, 325 wounded or missing. For the United States, the loss of the Liberty Sentinel and its $42 billion cargo was a bitter pill. But the strategic message was clear. In less than one morning, the myth of Chinese naval invulnerability had been shattered. The United States had absorbed a blow and responded with a storm of steel. The lesson was as old as history itself. Deterrence is not built on words, but on the will and ability to act when challenged. As the smoke drifted over the South China Sea and the world's news tickers blazed with headlines, the true impact of the confrontation began to ripple outward. This was not just a clash of ships and missiles. It was a collision of national ambitions, military doctrines, and the very idea of who would shape the future of Asia's most contested waters. In the hours that followed, analysts and officials across the globe scrambled to interpret what had just unfolded. For some, the events of September 23rd were a sobering reminder of how quickly a regional dispute could escalate into a crisis with global consequences. For others, it was a case study in the limits of power, how even the most fortified positions could be rendered vulnerable by speed, surprise, and superior technology. In Beijing, the mood was somber. The loss of Woody Island was not just a military setback. It was a psychological blow. For years, Chinese state media had portrayed the island as an unsinkable fortress, a symbol of the nation's rise and its determination to defend its maritime claims. Now, those images were replaced by satellite photos of craters, burning aircraft, and shattered infrastructure. The government moved quickly to control the narrative, but the truth was impossible to hide. The world had seen the devastation, and so had the Chinese people. Inside the halls of power, China's leaders faced a dilemma: retaliate and risk a wider war with the United States, or absorb the loss and recalibrate their strategy. The stakes were enormous. A miscalculation could draw in regional allies, disrupt global trade, and trigger a conflict no one truly wanted. For now, Beijing chose silence, its next move shrouded in uncertainty. In Washington, the calculus was different. The president's address had rallied the nation, and support for the Navy's actions was overwhelming. Lawmakers from both parties praised the swift response, while military leaders emphasized the importance of readiness and resolve. Yet behind the scenes, there was no celebration, only a sober recognition of the costs. The loss of American lives and the destruction of the Liberty Sentinel were painful reminders that even the most powerful military in the world is not immune to risk. For the families of the fallen, the events of that day would never be just headlines or history. In small towns across America, flags flew at half-staff. Communities gathered to honor the sailors who had given their lives, their stories now woven into the larger narrative of service and sacrifice. The Navy moved quickly to support the wounded and their families, ensuring that no one faced the aftermath alone. Meanwhile, in the South China Sea, the aftermath of the battle was still unfolding. Salvage teams worked around the clock to contain the environmental damage from the burning oil, their efforts hampered by the scale of the disaster. The Liberty Sentinel, once a symbol of economic power, was now a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly fortunes can change in the fog of war. On Woody Island, Chinese rescue crews dug through the rubble, searching for survivors and recovering the fallen. The devastation was total. Hangars collapsed, radar domes shattered, fuel depots still smoldering. For the soldiers and sailors stationed there, the sense of shock was palpable. They had believed in the island's defenses, trusted in the strength of their nation's military. Now, they faced the grim reality of defeat. Yet, even in the midst of destruction, stories of courage and humanity emerged. American and Chinese sailors, once adversaries, found themselves united by the shared experience of loss. Messages of condolence crossed the digital divide, a quiet acknowledgement that beneath the uniforms and flags, the cost of conflict is always measured in human lives. As the day wore on, the strategic implications of the battle became clearer. For America's allies in the region, the events of September 23rd were both reassurance and warning. The U.S. had demonstrated its willingness to defend its interests and those of its partners, but the price had been high. In Tokyo, Manila, and Hanoi, leaders weighed their own positions, calculating how best to navigate the shifting tides of power. For China, the loss of Woody Island forced a reckoning. The outpost had been a linchpin in Beijing's strategy to control the South China Sea, a forward base for air and naval operations. Its destruction left a gap in China's defensive perimeter, one that would take years and billions of dollars to rebuild. More importantly, it shattered the illusion of invulnerability that had underpinned China's approach to the region. In the United States, military planners pored over the lessons of the battle. The success of the Aegis system, the precision of the Tomahawk strikes, the effectiveness of electronic warfare, all were studied in detail. But so too were the vulnerabilities exposed by the attack on the Liberty Sentinel. How had two missiles slipped through the defensive net? What could be done to better protect vital assets in the future? The answers would shape doctrine and procurement for years to come. As night fell over the South China Sea, the world was left to ponder the meaning of what had transpired. Was this the beginning of a new era of confrontation, or a painful but necessary reaffirmation of deterrence? Would China seek revenge, or would cooler heads prevail? For now, the guns were silent, but the echoes of battle lingered. In the final analysis, the events of September 23 were a stark reminder of the dangers that lurk in the world's flashpoints. They showed how quickly a single incident can spiral into a crisis, how the ambitions of nations can collide with devastating consequences. But they also revealed the enduring strength of those who serve, the resilience of communities, and the possibility of learning. Even in the aftermath of tragedy, as the world watched, one truth became clear. Freedom and security are never guaranteed. They must be defended, sometimes at great cost. The story of the Liberty Sentinel in Woody Island is not just a tale of loss and destruction. It is a testament to the courage, resolve, and sacrifice that define those who stand on the front lines of history.